Who doesn't like to click a button? I like clicking buttons, most everyone else likes to click a button, and the next best thing to clicking a button would probably be to click a link. But is there more to all this? What does a button or a link do? What happens after I click, and why was it even there in the first place? That, my friends, is an adventure in and of itself. When talking about ServiceNow UI Actions, there are leading practices for more than just the formatting and execution of code, but also for when and how to use a button or a link. I've uncovered several leading practices related to UI Actions, and I'd like to share those nuggets of knowledge with you in hopes that it'll help you on your ServiceNow journey. So, join me on this epic adventure where we explore the ServiceNow platform. Hi, I'm Alan Andreas, and welcome to Allenovation. In the ServiceNow Adventures with Alan series, I guide you through leading practices related to various areas of the ServiceNow platform. In previous adventures, we've explored client scripts and ACLs. If you haven't watched those videos, I invite you to check them out when you have the time. On this adventure, I'm going to focus on a few leading practices related to UI Actions. But before we get started, it's important to first understand what UI Actions are. UI Actions include the buttons, links, and context menu items on forms and lists. They make the UI more interactive, customized, and specific to user activities. So, now that we know what UI Actions are within the ServiceNow platform, let's get into our first nugget of knowledge, which is an example of what not to do. Here, we have a scenario where someone loves buttons a little too much, and they've basically created a button for every action you could ever want to do on the platform. As you can see, it can become very cluttered and a bit overwhelming. When deciding if you should create a button or not, you'd want to keep these things in mind. Understand the usage of the button. Would the button be used regularly? For the layout, it's leading practice to not have more than 5 buttons presented to the user at one time, and keep the name short and to the point. For example, a maximum of 25 characters. As shown earlier, it can get overwhelming and it creates a lot of noise on the page for the user if there's buttons all over and the UI is not consistent. You'd want to evaluate the current need and consider choosing a different UI action like a related link, especially if the name is going to be too long, or a context menu option if the action relates to form administration functions. Lastly, think about the condition. When is the button or action expected to be utilized? Dynamically after a certain form value changes? Remember that UI action conditions, which determine visibility, are evaluated when the page loads. It's not continuously reevaluated when a field value is changed on the form. If you have a situation where you want the button or link to dynamically appear on the page as the user is changing field values, you may want to review the process and consider an alternate approach, such as an on-change client script or move the logic to a business rule. In the same vein as nugget number 1, nugget of knowledge number 2 also helps you evaluate when and where to use UI actions. The theme here is minimal and simple. Keep the UI action script minimal and simple, and leverage business rules or script includes for follow-on script execution if the logic needs to be available elsewhere in the system or if it's fairly complex. Script includes make code more scalable, testable, and manageable. Speaking of script includes, our third nugget of knowledge is a recommendation to think of your peers. Use a script include if the condition logic is too complex or too long. You may not know this, but the condition field does have an out-of-the-box max character limit, and once you start extensively scripting, you can quickly reach that max limit. On top of that, if the logic is complex, it can be hard for others to read and understand what all is going on. So it's recommended to use a script include instead, and while you can technically increase the max character limit on this field, it's not recommended to do so. Our fourth nugget of knowledge is related to client-side execution of UI actions. Wrap it up. If the UI action is enabled to run on the client, as indicated by the client checkbox being checked, you'll need to wrap your script in a function. The function name is then specified in the onClick field. But did you know that script left outside of that function will execute when the page loads if the condition is met? Here's a random trivia fact for those of you who may be curious. Where do UI actions that have this rogue onload client script fall in the script execution order as the page loads? Well, we've done the testing for you, and the script execution order is client script, UI policy, then UI action. The fifth nugget of knowledge is a reminder that if your UI action is enabled to run on the client, you must specify within the onClick field setting the same function name that is in your script, else your script will not execute when you interact with the action. Nugget of knowledge number 6. You should ensure your action names are uniquely named, or you run the risk of another UI action script executing if those actions are on the same table. There's been situations where individuals have created one UI action and then made a direct copy of that record with a slightly different script, but left the action name the same on both. Now, when trying to execute that action, the other UI action's code could run instead. Our seventh nugget of knowledge is related to overriding parent table UI actions. There are UI actions that are defined on a parent table, like the task table, and you may not want that UI action to apply to a specific child table, like incident or a custom task extended table. In those situations, you can override the parent table's UI action by creating another UI action on your extended table with the same action name. So this will basically substitute the parent UI action. Keep in mind that this is a different scenario than our sixth nugget of knowledge, as this situation mentioned here is related to a parent UI action and its effect on a child table. The eighth nugget of knowledge applies to situations where you may want to limit by role who can interact with the UI action. Traditionally, you'll see most UI actions specifying user role checks via script in the conditions field. As we align things more closely to no-code, low-code solutions, it's recommended to use the requires role list when you want to limit by role who can see the UI action, as this doesn't require the use of scripting. Additionally, if you want to limit when the UI action is visible by form view, our ninth nugget of knowledge guides you to utilize the UI action visibility related list as the preferred way to define specific form views for when the UI action should be visible. The 10th and final nugget of knowledge for UI actions is a bit of an advanced piece of information to let you know that you can, technically, call a UI actions server script from a client script. For example, if you have an onChange client script that executes when the user changes the assigned to field value, and in that client script I wanted to call a specific UI actions server-side script due to some sort of process reason, you can do so by using the following code. The third parameter is where you'd provide the name of the action specified in the respective UI action you want to call. I don't see this being a very common need, but we wanted to throw that out there in the spirit of understanding the tools and functionality available to you. We've covered a lot of great information. Let's review the nuggets of knowledge uncovered by our adventure of the ServiceNow platform regarding UI actions. Consider the design. It's leading practice to not have more than 5 buttons presented to the user at one time and keep the names short and to the point, like a maximum of 25 characters. Minimal and simple. Keep the UI action script minimal and instead leverage business rules or script includes for follow-on script execution if the logic needs to be available elsewhere in the system or is fairly complex. Think of your peers. Use a script include if the condition logic is too complex or too long. Wrap it up. If the UI action is enabled to run on the client as indicated by the client checkbox being checked, you'll need to wrap your script in a function. Specify the on-click. If your UI action is enabled to run on the client, you must specify within the on-click field setting the same function name that is in your script. Use unique action names. You should ensure your action names are uniquely named, or you run the risk of another UI action script executing if those actions are on the same table. Same action names. You can override the parent table's UI action by creating a UI action on your extended table with the same action name. Role restriction. It's recommended to use the requires role list when you want to limit by role who can use the UI action, as it doesn't require the use of scripting. Visibility by view. Utilize the UI action visibility related list as the preferred way to define specific form views for when the UI action should be visible. UI action in client script. You can technically call a UI action server script from a client script, however, we don't see this being a very common need. That list is not all-inclusive, as there are plenty more leading practices related to UI actions out there. I encourage you to conduct further research and go on an adventure of your own to learn more. I sincerely appreciate you taking the time to watch this video, and I hope you've learned something. If you enjoy ServiceNow content like this, please consider subscribing to the channel and like this video. Once again, my name is Alan Andreas, host of Allenovation, and I'll see you on the next adventure.